I just posted a video on the hatred that circulates around YouTube. It's unnecessary most of the time, and it's really uncalled for. You know, we're all human, all of us, and that includes other religions. Um, I was born and raised Christian. Um, I believe in the Holy Bible. Um, I've read the New Testament at least a dozen times in 4 or 5 different translations. Um, Firstly, the NIV, New International Version, and then I kind of branched out into some other versions, and then ultimately read it in the King James, the New King James, and then now the Revised English, New English. There's so many. I've read it in the Message several times, um, and even as many times as I've read it, it does not make me an expert. It simply doesn't. But I want to talk about Muslims. Okay? I was in the military for 22 years. I've been over in the desert. I've stomped around. Now, most of the time, most of my time was spent in the Navy. I did start in the Army, but most of my time was spent in the Navy. And even in the Navy, we pulled in over in Abu Dhabi and I'm not going to say wherever, but I spent my first anniversary in Kuwait City. So that should tell you a little bit. Not like the Marines and the Army guys, you know, out there stomping around digging foxholes and whatnot, but, you know, got a lot of respect for y'all that are, you know, out there doing what you do. I want to talk about Muslims for a minute and our misperception of them. Muslims, as a rule, or not entirely, but as a rule, at the inception of the religion, it was an extremely tolerant religion. And when they went out and they conquered half of the world, they did it with peace. They just kind of came in and took over. There's a lot of history. They did not come in and conquer and destroy. They didn't destroy cultures. They came in and sucked the life out of cultures, but the cultures were left intact. And then they assumed all of the knowledge of those cultures as they went. And as they assumed those other cultures and the knowledge that was contained within them, they became smarter and smarter and smarter. And some of the greatest philosophers and scientists and doctors came from the Muslim world. And one word that we've come to know just overwhelmingly sometimes is the word jihad. And so the question I have for this video is, what is jihad? And we understand it in modern terms from the mass media to mean war. Jihad is war. They're waging jihad. They're waging war on us. And that is true. But it's not completely true. The word jihad is more attuned to the word struggle. And it's a holy struggle. And the idea is to follow God's will. The jihad is the struggle to follow God's will. The struggle to lead a virtuous life and to further the universal mission of Islam through teaching, preaching, and, when necessary, warfare. Now, the problem is the only type of jihad that we hear about is the warfare. And that is absolutely certainly going on, and it needs to be stopped. We've got those extremists out there that their first thing that pops into their head is, let's kill some infidels. You know, and an infidel is anybody who doesn't believe in Islam. But Muslim was started in a tolerant fashion, and it has become more extreme and more warlike. As a Christian people, even as Jews or those who follow the Judaic law, we are taught to love God and love others. And that's actually what the Muslims were taught as well. But none of us seem to follow it. I mean, none of us. Christians are killing Jews, and Jews are killing Christians, and Catholics and Protestants standing in the street throwing rocks at each other, and all of a sudden you've got dozens dead. Now, it's been decades since that last happened that I know of. But it happens, and it's ridiculous. If we're all following the Word, and the Word changes between the three main Zoroastric religions, but the Old Testament, for the most part, remains the same. The first 5 chapters of the Holy Bible is the Torah. The remainder of the Old Testament is the prophets and the kings. The Jews read it, the Christians read it. A good piece of that, the Muslims read it. The Muslims believe in the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. We've got to start learning to get along with each other as a people so that we can let God work through us, through our separate religions, and get to a closer understanding of what is written in His Word. And New Testament is the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then you've got some testimony from James and John, the Revelator. And the rest of it is made up by the Pauline letters. I'll move my mouse real quick. The meat of what the rest of the world is studying is in the Old Testament. Okay? So, when Jesus is preaching in the synagogues, He's preaching from the Old Testament, the Torah, the kings, and the prophets. None of the rest of the New Testament was written. It was being lived, and people later wrote about it. It took 40 years before they started writing anything. That's when the first Gospels were written. And then Paul didn't come around until much later on the road to Damascus while he was out killing Christians. Jesus appeared to him in a vision, and he was converted. Praise God for that, right? But listen, Muslims, Jews, Christians, apparently we all serve the same God. Now, Muslims will say there is no God but Allah. And I'm not going to finish the rest of the statement, because if you say this with 2 witnesses, then you're Muslim. I don't want to go that road, okay? It's difficult to put a label on the type of religion that existed during Christ's time, because Christ was not Christian. He wasn't even called Christ. He was called Yeshua, which is closer to Joshua, but once you start translating around, go to the Greek and the Latin and everything else, it kind of finally comes out as Jesus. But at any rate, I just want to talk to you about tolerance, not of. I don't want to go too much down that road. My point is, love God, love others, and let's do our best to show each other, no matter who we are, race, color, creed, religion. Let's take care of each other, all right?